Okay, I guess it's working, hopefully. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Behind the Wrestler. My guest at this time is none other than the standard hero himself, Graham Hughes.
Hello. Hopefully, it's working okay and you can hear me and I
Yep, I
didn't
hear
muck
you.
it up.
Thank you very much for taking out the time and joining us and telling us your story.
You are welcome. Hopefully, it won't be too
Okay,
boring.
okay, first question that you've obviously been asked many, many times throughout since you've started. Who, when, and where inspired you to become a professional wrestler?
Um, so I don't really know. It's probably the easiest question. So I remember watching wrestling when I was a kid, but the wrestling that I remember watching when I was a kid, I couldn't have seen when I was a kid. So I remember in my head watching Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3. However, that happened when I was young, like too young to watch wrestling, and nobody in my family's ever watched wrestling, so it couldn't have been that. Um, but I do remember when I was about 13, maybe 12 or 13, was sort of the height of the D-Generation X, the D-Generation X with X-Pac, not the D-Generation X with Shawn Michaels, and that was the big rage at all the school in school. Everybody was doing it, and some people were some people who were kicking the shit out of me, for lack of a better word, were going on about wrestling at the same time as they were kicking the shit out of me. So it led me to kind of look a little bit more and see what on earth everybody was on about. We didn't have Sky or cable or anything like that, so it was just a case of uh, looking at what we could. We had Channel 4, which used to show, I think it was Sunday Night Heat on a Sunday. It was a week or 2 weeks late, I think. And then I watched it from there. And then a good friend of mine, whose name is Patrick, he got me hooked a little bit more when I was 14. I was part of a drama group, and he really liked wrestling. And I used to go over to his house before the acting class, and we would watch SmackDown, I think it was, and then go and but then go to our acting class afterwards. So that was kind of the sort of the way I got into it was sort of through those two channels. And wrestler wise, Triple H was always the wrestler I thought was the biggest badass.
And getting inspired by Triple H and watching all those guys. When did you decide that you wanted to become a professional wrestler, and how did you go about finding a wrestling academy over in the UK?
So I thought I was the smartest person around, and I thought I had the best route of doing it. So there was before Google, there was what was the search engine? I think it was Yahoo and Alta Vista, and possibly Ask Jeeves. There was a list somebody had put together of wrestling schools. They were all in America. So I was going to wait till I was 18 and write off to every single school. I had started to write a letter to the WWE to say why I should be a wrestler.
Right.
Um, and I remember one of the points that somebody had encouraged me to write, um, and said, I remember the first table spot that there was in wrestling, and it was this date and this time, and it was this match. Show prior knowledge. And obviously, I was going to be a wrestler based off that.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, nothing was as accessible as it is now. Now you go on Google, there's wrestling schools galore. The way I got into it was just by chance. So my sister went to a dancing class in Fratton in Portsmouth, which is where I'm from. So the to Scott, who said he sounds British, I am British. I haven't been there for a while, but I am British still. So my dad took my sister to her dance class, and he heard a whole lot of noise. My dad had a look, and there was a wrestling ring there, and it was the home of the FWA Academy. And he went in there and inquired about it. You had to be 16 to join, and I was only 14, so I wasn't old enough.
Mhm.
Um, but my dad managed to get um, Mark, who was Mark Sloan, to agree to me being able to come and take part when I turned 15, which was a couple of weeks later. And then I turned 15, and 4 days or 3 days after my 15th birthday, I went to training and never stopped.
And going to your first training session and getting your first like your first taste of what the wrestling business was and is. Um, what did you take away from your first day, and what motivated you to keep going back?
I mean, I was hooked. I was absolutely terrified. I was a shy 15-year-old little kid. I was a young 15-year-old. I was not a confident 15-year-old. I was a bit of a mess of a person at 15. I'm probably still a bit of a mess of a person now. Um, I think that's changed too much. But at 15, I was terrified. So my dad had said, and I tried to get around it. He showed me a flyer, and there was a flyer on the little flyer. I mean, Mark always used to produce amazing advertising for shows and still does and things. And I said, well, no, this isn't for training. This is for a show. And my dad sort of said, no, no, it's definitely for a show. You have, sorry, it's definitely for training. You have to go. Like, this is what you want to do. You need to go. So my dad made me go, and he pushed me through the door. It was one of Mark's favorite stories about me is that he watched my dad push me through the door, which did actually happen. You know, my dad pushed me through the door. Um, and then as soon as I stepped through the ropes, I was hooked. Everybody was really nice, really friendly. There weren't too many people. I think when I started, there were maybe 8 people before me. Um, a couple of which who are still wrestle. Maybe two, which was Andy Simmons and Raj Ghosh were both there when I started. Um, and just, I'm going to miss people out along the way, but just so I don't, because you know, people being how they are. When I started, you had James Ty, who was always the best and probably still is. I think he still does matches every now and then. Andy Simmons, it was Ricky Webb, Raj Ghosh, a guy called Neil Pyle, a guy called Dave Crispin, and Christopher Park, who used to wrestle as Chris Justice. So they were the main guys who were there. There was also a guy called Lee, and there was a guy called Max who went on to wrestle as Max Voltage. Um, and that was it. There wasn't anybody else. That was the entirety of who was at training. And everybody was really nice, really welcoming. And I think one of the things that hooked me the most was I got shown a whole bunch of stuff, how to bump, how to lock up a couple of tiny things. At the end of the training session, which was 4 hours long, we did a tag match, and Mark was on one side and I was on the other side as part of it, and he lifted me up for a suplex, and we'd gone over it I think 2 or 3 times throughout the course of the evening on how to do a suplex, and he said, "As I lift you up, just hook your leg around mine." So as he lifted me up, he lowered me back down into a small package, and I won the match. And 15 years old, insecure as ever, getting a chance to win something, and everybody being excited that I had won. That was it. I was hooked on that sort of feeling from there.
And like the trainings as they progressed and stuff, and you got more and more experience, and then finding out about your debut, that you're going to debut on a show, which, if I remember correctly, because I know you've told me this before, was against Mark. Um,
It was.
and how did that all come about? What did you take away from it? What was that whole entire experience? And how was your first debut? And what what did you do to prepare for it?
So I had I had an unusual, not to say unusual because lots of the academy guys did, but I had 2 debuts. I had 2 different debuts. I had the unofficial one, or my sort of trainee debut, and then I had my actual, I'm a wrestler debut, I guess. The first one was Mark started running shows, or the FW Academy started running shows, which was the Future Shock series of shows, um, which was a the idea was initially that the first half of the card was made up of trainees. Everybody has to excuse me. I've got a stutter and a lisp in it as I get tired, and this is insanely nerve wracking for me because I don't like these sort of things. I'm not very good at these sort of things, so my lisp and stutter will be quite visible, I'm sure. Um, and sorry, so the first half of the card was for trainees and debuting trainees to get experience, and the second half was for the pros. Um, and then James was always a pro because he'd been on shows, I think, a year prior, possibly. But everybody else was considered a trainee. So then everybody got broken up into series. So we had series one, which was those guys who were initially a training. So you had James was always an instructor, so we're sort of far above the series guys. Then you had Andy Simmons, Raj Ghosh, Ricky Webb, Neil Pyle, Dave Crispin, and Christopher or Chris Justice, who were um, they were series one. And
Mm-hmm.
series two, when we started doing shows, which was January 2002, I think it was. And then the series two guys were myself, Max Voltage, Ian Logan, Paul Birchall, um, Steve, and somebody else. And I'm missing somebody, and it's really bad of me. I can't think of the sixth person. There were six in each series,
Mm.
and so there was always six people in a series, and then you had six people in series three, which was after that. When we started doing shows, there were just two series guys. We all had to be um, in battle royals for the shows. So the first half of the show would close with these battle royals, and I was the referee for the show as well. So I used to do the refing, and then I would do the battle royals as well. And I came second in every battle royal until I debuted, and that was the running joke of things is that I would never quite win, but I was always a close second. Um,
Mm.
and then I had my actual debut, which came about a few months early. So, being part of Series 2, we were all meant to debut in August of 2002. Um, and made my debut in May. And the way that came about was, yeah, it was August. And so the way that came about was we used to go to gymnastics every Tuesday,
Mm.
and Mark wanted me to do a shooting star press. And it was something that I never thought I was able to do. And I thought I was trying, but I wasn't. Um, I thought that I was giving it my best, but I wasn't because I could
Mm.
do them. I could do moonsaults like nobody's business. Um, but I couldn't get my head around doing a shooting star press. And Mark said to me that he has faith that I could do it. And then after gymnastics, when everybody else had gone, I broke down in tears outside Mark's house in the middle of Fratton in Portsmouth, and was just in tears. You know, it's 10 o'clock at night. I was 16. I'd only been 16 about 2 weeks, so I was yeah, I was really um, a bit of a mess of a kid, as I've said, and probably will say again. And then Mark said, "I'm going to show you how much faith I have in you and how much faith I have in everyone." And I asked how, and he called Chris Justice and said, "I'm meant to be wrestling you in 4 days' time on Saturday at our show, but now you're going to be wrestling somebody else." And he hung up the phone. Um, and then Mark said to me, "Do you know why I did that?" And I said, "To show me that you have faith in Chris that he's going to, go and do well." And he said, "No, it's to show you that I have faith in you because you're making your debut this weekend." And that was how I found out I was making my debut. And contrary to some people's belief, I didn't ask for it. It definitely didn't want it. Um, but it got me, a lot of heat with people over a period of time because I debuted months before I should have done. And I can understand why people were angry and not happy about it. Um,
Yep.
but one of those things it's how the wrestling business goes. So look back at it and reflect now, and I was just very lucky. But yeah, I mean that's how my debut came around, um, and I was, I mean, almost throwing up backstage, sitting on the sitting on the speakers or by the speakers backstage, and I remember I can't remember who it was told me. It may have been Andy Simmons telling me that the scariest moment of wrestling is when the bell rings before, like at the end of the match before yours, because that's the one where you're next. You have to go, and there's nothing you can now do to stop it. You're there. and that is absolutely true. And still, when I'm nervous and a bit worried now, that's the scariest bell ever, is finding that one just when the match ends before yours. But I didn't really do too much to prepare. I had to try and scramble to get gear. I think Ricky Webb lent me his kick pads. So thank you, Ricky. And James Ty lent me a pair of his old tights that he didn't want to wear. Um, which thank you, James, as well, because yeah, I mean, I didn't have anything of my own. I'd ordered gear, but it was still whatever it was, a few weeks away, because we had to have gear ready for August. But yeah, my gear wasn't ready, so I had to borrow things off of people.
Okay. And getting to work with your your trainer, and having a couple more matches with him and getting more experience under your belt. Um, what what did you take away from going from your first match to having a couple matches, and then him giving you even more faith and giving you the opportunity to start teaching people at the FWA Academy?
So I started teaching way before I should have done. I think I taught my first session maybe 2 months after I'd started.
Right.
Um, I when I started, we only had the senior sessions, so the adults. And a couple of months later, Mark started the junior sessions, which were, I think, from the age of 12 to 15. Sorry, 12 to 16. Um, and he told me to come along there. And there was one trainee then, which was Dan Head, and he told me to go teach him. And that's when I started teaching. And I think teaching made me a better wrestler, because you have to look at things in a different way than just, oh, well, this is a wrist lock. This is how you do a wrist lock. You have to break it down and say why you do it and what the kind of the ins and outs of it all. And so that helped me
Right.
a lot. And that's how I got into teaching. And I haven't really stopped. That's kind of been the one real consistent thing. So even when I haven't done shows, I've still taught um, over the years.
And getting the opportunity to teach, but also learning yourself, and doing um, shows and more shows, and working with one opponent for about a couple of weeks or a couple of days, or you guys are working maybe a summer camp together. What's the difference between working for with the same person consistently? How do you guys come up with different ways to evolve your match?
So most of the matches that were in series at that time were against people like Mark. I wrestled Mark, I think, more than I wrestled anybody else.
Mm.
I don't know if I, I think looking back on it, I think Mark wanted to help me along as much as possible, and that was a good way to help people learn and to grow and adapt, is to wrestle them and show new things. Um, I would always wrestle James, or say always, I wrestled James a few times as well. Um, but it depends. Sometimes things would change. Lots of the camp stuff that I did was part of a gimmick called Entourage, where I was on the outside and I would hand Mark water and do some of that kind of stuff. But I always learn something new every time, and I still do for the most part. Is the different people you get to wrestle, the more you get to wrestle people, and the better people you get to wrestle, the more you learn. Um, we sometimes we had insane schedules, so we do. I was still at school because I was only sort of 16, so I would get picked up from school at 3 o'clock, um, and then get changed sort of in the first truck stop, which was 20 minutes away. Then we'd make it to a venue, put the ring up. Um, Sometimes wrestle on that show, but more often than not, because it was a main FWA show, we wouldn't wrestle on that one. Then, or quite a lot of the time, I would um, wrestle some of the trainees from other schools. I remembered at one point Drew McDonald had a school, and I would always do little matches before the show started. So not even dark matches, but just matches beforehand for Drew to see how they were. And again, I got amazing feedback from people like Drew McDonald in that time too. Um, and then we'd pack up the ring and travel to the next place and wrestle on a Saturday, which would be one of our shows somewhere or somebody else's show somewhere. And then you'd pack up and you'd go to training on a Sunday again. So it was kind of a bit dotted around. They had a lovely weekend, which sort of is dubbed the weekend from hell. And I think it was, we went from Portsmouth to Telford. And then in Telford, there was an FWA show. And then from the FWA show, we travelled to, I can't remember where it was, to Preston for GWF Battle of the Champions, um, which was an awesome show because it had um, people like Jake the Snake Roberts and Michael Kovac on that show, and Little Guido from ECW on there as well. People like Trent Acid were on that show. There was an amazing match between, I think, Doug and James, which it may have been that one or it may have been another one that they had their first match together. But I got to see some amazing matches and meet amazing people along the way, which is invaluable. And I think it's a shame that New Zealand doesn't have something the same as that kind of traveling aspect of wrestling. And you don't really get shows Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You don't get shows throughout the week to go and learn. You know, it's a slower process here than it is in England.
Yeah. And I want to talk about getting an opportunity to work for Mr. Fremantle, and getting to work for Premier Promotions. When you got that opportunity, what was the steps you took in place? What did you do to prepare? And how was all of that whole entire experience?
So the 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 way that Premier became sort of my second home in England was after I'd been wrestled in England for a couple of years and I got hurt. I came to New Zealand, and I wasn't going to wrestle. Then I ended up doing some stuff in New Zealand because I was feeling good. I dislocated my shoulder again and went back to England, and my visa had expired. Then in England, I had my surgery, and then I started teaching at the Justin Richard School of Wrestling. But it's very hard when you've been away for so long to get bookings, and lots of the
Mm-hmm.
FWA Academy guys or people who said they were FWA Academy guys didn't have the best reputation. We used to get lots of people who would come for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, couldn't hack it because it was hard. I mean, it was tough. It was really tough at times, and you had to be a certain person and a certain type of wrestler to be able to really make it there, or what we all thought would make it, or what I thought would make it. I guess probably more accurate. Um, and if you weren't, it was very hard. Probably mentally more than anything. I mean, it's always hard physically, but mentally it was probably quite exhausting, which is what I think I was quite lucky at. Um, it was mentally exhausting for me, but in a different sense. You're always kind of a bit protected, and it was really hard to find bookings, and nobody was really interested in me working for them. But
Mm-hmm.
you look back and I think, well, nobody knew who I was. So nobody's going to want to book me because I'm a nobody. And I remember I was chatting to Andy Simmons one night, and I was feeling a bit down, and I said, "Nobody is, how do you do it? How's the best way to go get bookings? Can what advice would you give me?" And he was brutally honest. He said, um, "Get a tan. Um, make sure you're going to the gym." And at that point, I was going to the gym anyway. I'd go to the gym every day, so that was a good one. And he said, "Just look after yourself and get a tan was kind of the main thing. Get a tan and work out and look good." So I said, "Yep, I fully agree." Um, and so I started looking into getting tans and things like that as well. And he had said to me, "Go and speak to John Fremantle, who runs Premier Promotions." And I'd met John a few years before, but never as a wrestler, as always as like a manager that I'd been on his shows doing the entourage gimmick. Um, and he said that he was going to speak to John on my behalf. So I called John, left a message. I think 3 days later, I got a phone call, which lasted half an hour or so with John. Um, and he said, "Well, I don't really know who you are. It's a bit of a risk, so I can offer you X amount of money to start off with, um, and I can offer you one date, which was I can't remember the date. It was a show in a tent basically. It was at a rugby um, party thing that he did every year.
Right.
It was like a private show almost, and he said that we'll do a 6-man tag on this show, um, and then we'll go from there. But I can't promise you anything because I've obviously committed all my dates to wrestlers already. And I was just thankful for the opportunity. And the match was myself, Daryl Allen, and a guy called Lee, who incidentally was the same Lee from the FWA Academy from years prior. Um,
Mm.
Wrestling, I can't remember what he was wrestling as. And it was against Wild Boar, who is now in NXT UK, and um, JD from the oh, my name's escaped me. London Riots, I think it was, um, and Rishi Ghosh. So obviously knew Rishi, and I worked well with Rishi. And again, I had no tights again because I was in the position where the tights weren't ready.
Mhm.
Um, and so, oh wait, sorry, I'm getting my stories really mixed up. So that match, that one was I got a phone call the day before that one and said after I'd agreed to do the match in the future, which was against Ian Logan um, in Bournemouth. John called me and said, "Oh, I've got this spot opened up for tomorrow if you're interested." And so I said yes, and that's when the 6-man tag was. And so I had to borrow Dan Head's gear um, and wrestle in Dan Head's gear for that show, and that was an interesting one because it showed me how out of ring conditioning I was and how much more I still had to do and how much more I had to work just to kind of be able to move around the ring the same way. Um,
Mhm.
and it was hard, it was tough, and it was different being around everybody because it was a different set of circumstances that I was around. It was the first time I met JC Ace, who's one of my wrestling heroes, and it was the
Right.
first time I met Chris Kay, and um, I took the famous Chris Kay soccer kick to the back, which was one of the most painful things I think I've ever felt in the wrestling ring. And I took a good couple of chops from Chris and from Jace as well. And you know, and that's how it is. I mean, it's what you do. And you went up and say thank you, and you try and talk to people because nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows who I am from the person next to me. So what the onus is on me to go and say hello to them and to introduce myself to them because they don't need to introduce themselves to me, and that's the hard part. Um, and that's sometimes the hard part is you have to put yourself out there and say hello to people and recognize in which situation you do what.
And just backtracking here, going back to the FWA. You had a. I'm gonna let you tell the rest of the story.
Oh God.
The when wrestling was evolving and stuff, and the the cool flips and stuff came in, and it was just like go 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 go. You had a triple threat match, and it was just that high pace, like Ring of Honor style, just keep going and going and going. And I'm gonna let you tell the rest over there.
So that me, Mark, and Max as so aftershock. I think it was Aftershock 6, I think it was, or Aftershock 5, whatever the last show of the year was. It was December 2002. And we used to have to plan lots of our matches and work on them quite a lot. Me, Max, and
Mm-hmm.
Mark used to train on Monday nights and do triple threat matches on Monday nights. And lots of how we used to do things then, and not for everybody, but me and Mark used to have sequence 1, sequence 2, sequence 3, and so on and so forth. And me and Max had the same thing. We had a sequence called the Matrix sequence, which we do this series of moves and that series of moves, and just little words that would trigger each sort of spot, really. And so me, Mark, and Max planned this in, I don't speak for those two, but in my head, it was this epic, amazing, gonna change the wrestling world match. Um,
Right.
and I mean, it's athletic, it's impressive from that kind of standpoint, but it is not a classic. for the ages kind of wrestling match. Really, it's a bit of there's not too much selling, there's not too much crowd work. It's just whatever it is, like 15, 16 minutes or 20 minutes of just, pardon me, non-stop and go.
Right.
Um, and it's the first time that I ever tried and did a sit-down moonsault as well, or the split leg moonsault. Sorry, the one in the corner, um,
Right.
which was, something new. I got told I had to do it, but I wasn't allowed to practice it, so I didn't practice it. We just went and did it. But it was a good match. It was a fun match, and I think Max sat on my face, and there was and just to highlight how ridiculous some of these spots were, um, Mark gave Max a backdrop over the top rope to the outside, and I caught Max on my shoulders. And as I turn around, like look like I'm going to powerbomb him on the floor. Mark runs off the other rope and does a 619 to Max, kicking Max in the face, and Max gives me a hurricanrana on the outside.
Right.
So the whole thing was that way inclined. It was just that sort of start to finish. And thankfully, you can't find it anywhere on YouTube. It doesn't exist. It's not really anywhere, but it's
I'm sure you have the footage.
Oh, I've got the footage, but that doesn't mean everybody else can see the footage because it's not my best work. Let's just say that.
Um, and you know, just to for people who don't know, for just to let everybody know how hard the schedule that the FWA guys had, and yourself as well, um, especially with the training and the dieting and everything. Um, what would you can you just tell everybody what kind of drills you guys had to do, what kind of warm ups you guys had to do, the diet plan, how long was the training days, and I if I remembered, if I've done my research correctly here, you also did training camps as well, which you guys got a whole bunch of new faces as well, and I'm going to mention just one name on there, which was Drew Galloway, Drew McIntyre. Um, and you got to train plenty and plenty of people and got to meet um, plenty and plenty of people, and through training camps and training regularly. um, what was that whole experience like, and all of that getting put together, and just Mike giving you all of this faith, and giving you the trust to like, hey, he can do it.
So, well, it's a lot of stuff. So the uh, the warm up was never too bad to start off with, um, but it was designed to sort of to break you a little bit. And if you didn't do the warm up, you couldn't train. It was kind of always the rule. Um, so it'd be things like um, upside down sit ups. So you're in a in a tree of woe in a corner, which is you hook your feet
Mhm.
around the top tensioner and you do sit ups. It
Right.
was do a handstand up against the ropes and do press ups, do fingertip press ups, which they suck. Um, it was things like that. It was not the easiest warm up, but it was not the hardest. But it wasn't fun. If you didn't do it, you didn't train.
Right.
So the um the, so the training days was Tuesday we'd do gymnastics, which I think was 7 until 9. Wednesday was the regular adult training session, which was 6 until 10.
Right.
And then the other adult session was a Sunday, which was 11 until 6. So that's 7 hours. Um, so yeah, so it was those sort of training days were hard anyway. They were long. I mean, you get half an hour for lunch on a Sunday, but you're still, it's still 7 hours worth of training or 6 hours worth of training, however you want to look at it. And trainings were not always slow. It was kind of a constant go for the most part, I think. Um,
Hmm.
I had a different amount of training to do than everybody else. I was very lucky in that I was 15, 16 and at school. I didn't have a job. I could go and um, finish school at 3 o'clock, and I could be at the gym by 3:30. I would work out with Mark at 4 o'clock um, in the gym who was owned up by another guy upstairs, and then I would do wrestling training, or I would watch something with Mark, and Mark would teach me wrestling, and I would watch videos, and he would explain why things were right and why things were wrong, and he opened my eyes to the world of wrestling because there wasn't a YouTube. YouTube didn't exist. It was all on
Mhm.
VHS tapes. DVDs weren't really a thing. Um, in 2001, it was all old school VHSs. Um, the Monday, Max would come to training with us, and then Thursday, Friday was the junior sessions. It started off at just Fridays, so I would teach the junior sessions on Fridays, and then we got to a point we had too many junior trainees, so we split the. Um, I think the class got up to 40, and then we split it into two classes, and you could only go one day, and then we got up to 60. So we had 30 on Thursday and 30 on Friday,
Wow.
and then we ended up doing a Sunday morning class for the juniors as well. So it would be, I think it was 2 hours. So I think it was 9 till 11. Before the junior class on a Sunday, we would do wushu with everybody from 10 until 11.
Mhm.
So we'd all start an hour earlier and do wushu, which is a martial art. I can't remember the name of the instructor, but he was a great instructor to have there. But we're always busy. Um, I would get home 10:30 pretty much every night, put on wrestling and fall asleep, and then go to school the next day, or get up and go for a run the next day, and sort of rinse and repeat. I trained 7 days a week. Um, Saturday was either training or a show, or mostly shows, going to shows to help out with the ring. It was, I think, for 2 years, I was at the FWA Academy gym every day. And in the summers when I was off school in half term, I was there 9 a.m. until 10 p.m., either cleaning up, sweeping the floor, fixing parts of the ring, or doing something, or learning, or just wrestling. Or I used to take personal training sessions as well.
Right.
Um, then the weekend training camps and the week training camps. So we started doing weekend training camps, which started before I started. So I think the first weekend training camps had people the likes of Ross Jordan, who was RJ Singh, um, and that's where Max Voltage started. So there was one of them prior to me starting training, and then the second one that they did, I was there, and that's where Paul Burchell started and Jez Gardner started as well, I believe, or Jez had come to the one beforehand, possibly, but was back again because he travelled from Wales. And Jez owns a
Right.
really awesome school, which is All Styles Pro Wrestling Academy in Wales
Yep.
somewhere. So he came from that. He was one of our trainees from there, and a phenomenal talent and a phenomenal guy as well. And then we did week-long training camps, and those weekend training camps. Friday night was from 6 until 10. Saturday was from I think 8 a.m. until 10 p.m. And you get an hour for lunch, an hour for dinner. And then Sunday was the same again. I think it was 8 until 6 on the Sunday, and the last sort of 2 hours, with everybody would do a match, and you'd tape that match, and then you'd get a copy of it to take home. So I was meant to take part in the first one that I was able to take part in, but I ended up
Yep.
being a teaching assistant for half of it. And that's the first time I met Justin Richards. He was on one of those camps. And he terrified me, absolutely terrified me, because there was a photo on the wall of his promo photo. And he looks like he's about ready to kick the shit out of him or rip somebody's head off. He looks really mean. And I remember asking James, I think, who it was. And he said it was Justin, and how good Justin was. And I just assumed, based on his promo picture, that he was a horrible, nasty person. And when I met him, he was going to beat me up.
Right.
Again, just remember I was 15, shy little bullied 15-year-old kid. So it always doesn't help. But he wasn't. Justin's the nicest person possibly around.
Yep.
Especially definitely the nicest person in wrestling, I think. Um, and then so the Drew McIntyre, he came to, I think it was the first week-long training camp, and I wasn't teaching on the first week-long training camp. However, I was asked to babysit everybody, um, which is the most ludicrous thing. Mark had to go to work, so and it was a school holiday, so I was at home. So I'd been in the gym at the center every day anyway. And Mark said, I've got some ECW tapes. If you want to sit down and watch them, all you have to do is be here. And I trust you to be here and look after everybody. Don't let anybody do anything silly. They'll just be working on matches. It's like, okay, yep, no problem. That's fine. I think that was Tuesday, possibly, or maybe
Right.
even been the first day, the Monday. And again, I never left. I slept at the gym. And I think that's when Drew had his sort of his training match at the end of the week against Jez, I believe. And just a nice little funny story. Uh, Drew wanted me to teach everybody how to do swanton bombs. I didn't know how to do them, but he wanted me to teach them. But yeah, so that's the first time I met Drew, and he came to another couple of training camps as well. And he would take what he learned and went back up to Scotland, which is a 9-hour drive away just to learn, which is the reason that he's made it to where he is.
And I think there was a question on one of the comments, if I pull that
There's a few
up.
questions. I mean, I'm happy for you to answer whatever or ask whatever. Sorry.
There, there was a few questions. I just gotta find that question again. Actually, we can answer this one. How long have you been in New Zealand?
So this time around, I've been here since January 2013. Then I was here for a couple of years beforehand, but I was mainly living in Blenheim and not wrestling. So what's that? 7 years?
I think so. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, 2020 now. 7.
We have another question that is, where is it? Who is your ultimate dream match against?
My ultimate dream match. So I'm going to say 3. So the main one for me would be JC Ace. Um,
Right.
and I was meant to wrestle JC Ace for SWF in Portsmouth in a tournament there. I was meant to wrestle Jason in the first round, and then there was a little bit of wrestling politics that went on, and I got told I was going to another show instead, which I don't know how that works, but it's how it went. I believe John Fremantle spoke to Chris Kay. Chris Kay is a promoter of SWF and said, I want to put Graham on my show. You got a show the same night, and Chris and John used to do lots of business together, I think. So I got bumped. I had a good match. I think it was in Red Hill. The match with me and who was it? Me and Barry Cooper against Rishi Ghosh and Wolf Alexander. And those matches are always fun. And Steve Gray was our referee. And so it was not a bad match to have, but I never did get my match against JC Ace. And now he's retired, so maybe one day, but you know, live on opposite sides of the world now,
They
so
never.
it's a bit harder. um,
Yeah.
and then and sort of the standard ones for me would be somebody like Triple H or Shawn Michaels, just because I shudder to think how much I'd get a chance to learn wrestling either one of those.
And making the move from the UK to New Zealand, and making New Zealand your second home, and starting up your own wrestling academy, where we do shows now as well. Um, how did that all come about, and how did the process of starting your own academy come about?
So once you start teaching, it's hard to not teach, um, because you look at everything through sort of that those eyes of this is this is wrong, or this isn't how I would do it. This is what I would like to change about that or that situation or this wrestler or this work. And what I find the most frustrating is sometimes when you can see somebody on the absolute cusp of being a wrestler and doing some amazing work, but then something will be in their way, and more often than not, it's bad advice or an ego or something, and that sucks. It's the biggest disservice to both the business and to that trainee at the same time, or that wrestler, depending on where they are in their career. So I like teaching, and I like the idea of I like watching people click. So there's a moment when you're teaching people where it's almost this loud, visible click, and when you hear that click and when you see that click, everything changes for them. They start to understand stuff in a different way. Um, they start to look at the things that they did previously, and they don't do those things anymore because they look through it different with sort of different lenses, I guess. And that's the best part for me is I was a kid who never should have been a wrestler, who never should have done anything other than sit at home and play video games. Not that there's anything wrong with that, especially in today's society, but I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't be able to have been a wrestler. And it was only through people putting in the work and the time and the effort into me that I got to live my dreams of being a wrestler. And I have pretty much lived every dream that I've had through being a wrestler. And it's how I met my wife, which obviously is how I got my kids. Um, it's given me everything, and in the least arrogant way possible. If I can help somebody else the same way, then that's what teaching is all about. And I miss teaching. When I wasn't teaching, I missed it. I went from the FWA Academy to the Wild for Wrestling School in Wellington for KPW, and like, man alive, when I got to Wellington to look at KPW, I hope nobody will get offended by this, but they probably will. They were a mess, an absolute
Right.
mess. Um, their biggest move was a body slam, which was a bad body slam. Um, they had really good foundations, really good technical stuff, and the guys certainly wanted to learn, but it was self-trained people teaching self-trained people, and that's the part that's going to offend lots of people. Lots of New Zealand wrestling at that time was self-trained guys teaching themselves and teaching other people, and so never going to have. Unfortunately, they're never going to have the same kind of training that is available elsewhere. Um, I I wasn't teaching at KPW for very long, but the change in everybody's work rate, effort, and just ability, because they all wanted to learn, they all wanted to get better, and there were some amazing guys who came from that little subsection of wrestling. If you look at Charlie Roberts, Shane Whitehead, those sort of guys came from that time. They were training beforehand, and I it sounds so arrogant to say, but I turned them into wrestlers from kids playing wrestler. I turned them into wrestlers, and that was the most rewarding thing is watching the TV series that they did just afterwards, and knowing that you had um, some small part helped with that journey is an amazing thing, and that's a really powerful thing as well. When I left New Zealand, I went back to England after I had my surgery. I went to the Justin Richard School of Wrestling, which just obviously owned by Justin, and he was having or needed to step away for a little bit and do spend less time wrestling. So I offered and said, "Look, your school's in Essex. I live in Portsmouth, which is a decent travel away, but I love Justin. Um, I will make that journey every week to teach if you want me to, if you need me to. Um, so just let me know." And he said yes and invited me to be his head instructor, which is probably the biggest honor I think I've ever had. And I went to teach
Mm.
there. Um, and again, watching the guys go from, I mean, Tanya and myself, we put those poor kids through their paces and then some. Um, we had an amazing facility in the can't remember what the facility called. It was the Dropkicks University of Wrestling, which we used to rent for a kind of was like fight uh, fight academy or fight to blood academy or something along those lines. And I'm kicking myself for not being able to remember it, but my brain's trash. Um, but we whipped those poor guys into shape, and there's some amazing wrestlers again who have come from that school. If you look at the top ones that come to mind, Jack Sexsmith, Bucket of Blood. There we go. Thank you, Kieran. It was close enough. Um, uh, again, sorry if I offended anybody by not being able to remember the name, but yeah, that was in East Tilbury. It was a great facility, and I had a ring, an MMA cage. My daughter's first sort of playpen was an MMA cage, which is impressive. And we ran those poor kids senseless for the first hour of every training, and you could watch the sweat drip off them. You could watch the fat melt away week after week, and it was amazing to see people really care and really work their asses off, and that's what they were doing. That all came to a head then when we had a visit from Kurt Angle, because we were about to become the TNA UK feeder group or feeder school. So we would take the guys that they wanted to from the UK, and we would train them and send them to Impact Pro Wrestling or TNA, pretty
Mhm.
much. Um, and we had a visit from Kurt Angle when he was doing his Olympic tour, and the visit didn't end well. Um, Dropkicks ended up inviting all of their trainees down too, which we'd only had X number of spaces for X number of people. And I see why they did, but it kind of got turned into a bit of something that it wasn't. And we had to vacate our use of the Bucket of Blood gym, which was a
Right.
shame. And we never really started back up again, which again was a big shame. And lots of our guys, Jerry Bakewell went to the London School of Lucha Libre and did amazing things there. Marky B, who wrestles as why is my brain so useless? Heroes was Freddie Mercutio. Mercurio. He's now in
Mhm.
Canada wrestling there, and he went to the London School of Lucha Libre, and he's doing phenomenally for himself. We had so many guys. Again, it's hard to say everybody without missing people out. But we had a whole amazing group of guys there who were ready to go. But we didn't run shows, and we never had any interest in running shows there because we didn't need to. You don't need to in England. You can be a standalone training school, and it's fine. And that's kind of how things started here. So when I moved back to New Zealand, and as always, Kieran Morrison is always a lovely fellow, um, because he's complaining that I'm not name dropping him enough.
Yeah, I saw that too.
So when I came back to New Zealand, I previously when I'd been in New Zealand, I lived in Blenheim and in Wellington. And Wellington had KPW and NZWPW, and Auckland had IPW at the time and Maniacs United at the time. And I I wanted to teach here, and I wanted to teach the British way of wrestling because, and no offense to IPW and Automaniacs, but I teach differently to they do. Um, Rightly or wrongly is up to everybody's own opinion.
Mhm.
Um, but I teach the British way mixed in with some of the American stuff, so it's kind of a it's based off experience of I've been wrestling for 19 years. In about 3 weeks, I've been wrestling for 19 years, so I hopefully have enough experience that people will be able to take something away from it, whether you're experienced or whether you're not. Um, they can hopefully take something away from or something good away from each session. Um, so I wanted to run New Zealand's first pro wrestling academy that didn't run shows because
Right.
everyone else had the training was to the training and shows ran kind of the same entity, and that was our mission originally, was to open and not do shows. I didn't want to do shows. We had no interest in doing shows. Our very first show, um, which was our sort of one night tournament show, which was our launch of our school, happened because we originally were going to rent a ring to come up here for a training session, and we ended up buying a ring instead. So we were like, well, the ring's up here. We got all these wrestlers coming up here, um, and so while we got everybody coming up, let's just do a show as well. You know, we won't advertise it very much. We'll just do a show and see, have a bit of fun. And we didn't advertise very much. We didn't get a big crowd, but that was never its purpose. We had our launch, and it went better than I could hope that it went for. And then we started training from there. And again, the whole goal was never to do proper shows. It was to do little things like, when you made your unofficial debut, and we did that in the middle of a field for a music festival, um, which, those sort of things were what we originally were aiming to do. Just these little sort of spot show things, not actual proper shows. But New Zealand wrestling being the place that it was at the time, uh, you kind of had to do shows to get your trainees experience, because not all of the doors were open for people all of the time, and it was hard. There weren't enough shows at that time to wrestle full time. I mean, there's still not enough shows to wrestle full time, but you can pretty much wrestle every week normally here. Before you couldn't. I think at that time KPW was running maybe 4 shows a year, but they had stopped. WPW were running a show a month. Um, IPW were running a show a month, and then they had Armageddons. Maniacs were running every couple of months, I believe, at the time. I don't think it was every month then. There was no wrestling in Christchurch. There was one set of shows in Blenheim, which I think was SCW, and that was kind of it. I mean, there wasn't enough to, you can't go to somebody and say, hey, I know you've got your full roster of shows, but I've got 6 guys here ready to do shows. Can we
Mm.
go and take over half your card? You can't do that. So in order to fully give the proper service to trainees, we had to run shows, which is what we did. And we used the FWA Academy formula for the start of it, where we had trainees on first, and then we get onto the sort of the established pros. And the idea is that we use the established pros and veterans that we can to allow the trainees to see them wrestle, to pick their brains and gain the knowledge from them. Um, Also, it's a good chance for wrestlers and trainees to start paying their dues, and it's you can get a good opportunity to wrestle some of these experienced guys as well. Like I I wrestle lots of the trainees. When people come in, they wrestle lots of the trainees as well, and I think it's really beneficial for everybody to learn from those experiences. So that's how we came about starting, and something I quite like is the story of how or why we're called the Hughes Academy of Professional Wrestling. So we wanted to be called an academy as kind of a paying tribute to the FWA Academy, and JRSW was the Justin Richards School of Wrestling. So I kind of
Mhm.
merged the two names together. So it was the Hughes Academy of Professional Wrestling, um, and that's also why kind of when we initially shortened the name, it was HAPW, which was the same as JRSW in my brain. So that's how we got our name. Well, that's how we came up with the name.
Um, I'm just seeing the comments list. Justin just comments saying same formula as the Hammerlocks wrestling in 1990s.
Yeah, so Hammerlock was like the first proper school. I mean, if you look at the people who came out of Hammerlock, I mean, I'm going to miss people, but you've got Justin, you've got Doug Williams, like Johnny Storm, Jody Fleisch. The list is absolutely endless. If you ever want to look at the training school that produced the most amazing wrestlers, it was Hammerlock. And I believe Justin was responsible for a lot of that because he was one of the coaches or one of the assistant coaches. I'm not too sure, but it was an amazing school that produced amazing people.
And then there's another question as well. The single best piece of advice you were given from wrestling that you can apply in everyday life.
Ooh, the best piece of advice. Mm. It's a hard one because lots of wrestling advice doesn't apply for the real world.
Hmm.
Um, my biggest piece of advice in the real world and outside of wrestling, and probably a little bit in wrestling as well, is you should live every day like you want to go home and look at yourself in the mirror. And that's my goal at the end of every day is to go home, look at myself in the mirror, and know that I haven't been an asshole to anybody. I've tried my best, and I can hold my head up high and look in the mirror and go, "Yep, I've done what I wanted to try and do."
And oh, hang on. I think there was another one.
There were a few that came up, but there's some
Yeah,
people
I'm, tr- I'm
spouting nonsense.
yeah, I'm trying to get the best ones and not the nonsense.
Yeah,
Um, where are we? Is Wayne King still wrestling?
yeah. I would read that in your head before you read those Rod Ward ones as somebody. I assume as somebody who's really clever within New Zealand wrestling, being an asshole.
All right. Okay.
They're
Oh,
they're
my
all
bad.
they're all dumbass names. There's
Where
some good Jay Nesbitt questions and what was the other one?
where are we? Oh, actually, I just remembered. I forgot. I was gonna ask this later on, but now, um, you mentioned him before in his wrestling academy as well. Jess Gardner with All Star Professional Wrestling also
Yes.
has shows which exist pro,
Yep.
uh, which I had the opportunity. Thank you to you for giving me the opportunity to meet him in person and get to work one of his shows. Getting to train him and seeing him open up his own school and also teach like the FWA style. Um, what is your take, and how proud are you of him of taking that step in his career?
So I was terrified before I met Jez because there was a kid who used to beat me up in school called Jez. And I didn't know his surname, and I they used to Mark used to post the trainee list for the camps on the FWA Academy website, and I used to visit that website multiple times a day because I wasn't aware that Mark ran it at the time. And I remember seeing the name Jez on the um, on the sheet to say this is the people who are attending, and I was terrified that it was the same guy who'd been beating me up. Um, and so when I eventually met Jez, this list was up for 6 weeks or 7 weeks, so I was just torturing myself every day. It was a nice big breath of relief um, to see why that it wasn't the guy who'd beat me up, but it's actually just an amazing human being in person. Um, so Jed is one of those guys who he was never not going to make it, and it's hard to explain why. It's like some people don't quite get it. Wales is not that close to Portsmouth. It is not the easiest journey to make.
Yeah,
Um, it's buses and trains and getting off this station and getting on that station, and it's a mission to get to. It's not just a case of driving 3 hours or 4 hours, or wrestlers a lot of the time moan and complain about driving 15 minutes down the road or 20 minutes down the road to their local training facility. But people like Jez traveled for hours and hours to get here. Um, and he was a guy who every weekend training camp he was on, every week long training camp he was on, and we're just getting better and better. He was also, I believe, the first guy to make it into a series of the FWA Academy without being a regular weekly trainee, which shows how much dedication and time and work he put in. And his trainees and the people on his shows, I would say, are very lucky to have somebody who has paid their dues that way and has done that much hard work. And seeing that he's opened his own school and he's got amazing trainees and an amazing, friendly, welcoming environment for people. And the shows he puts on are amazing. You can't really fault them. That's everything you want from anybody you ever train, whether you train them for 10 weeks or for years. That's what you want from everyone. And yeah, I mean, to say that I'm proud of how far he's come is an understatement, I think.
And you know, with the schedule that you are wrestling now to the schedule that you were used to, if you had the opportunity to have your previous schedule, would you take it, or would you stick to the schedule that you're on now?
I would take it in a heartbeat. I miss wrestling lots, and I miss wrestling. You know, my schedule in England before I left was, you know, 2 or 3 shows a week. Um, and now at the moment, I only wrestle the Hughes Academy shows, which is every 6 weeks or every 3 weeks, depending on what's going. Pardon me, on what's going on.
Mm.
Um, but even the most wrestling once a week is it's just a hobby, and I'm not. You know, I never wanted it to be my hobby. I wanted it to be my job and my career, and I was very fortunate and very lucky to have it make it as my job and my career for a long time. At two different various times in my life, it's been my job, and the um, I love that it has been and has been able to be my job. But I take that absolutely in a heartbeat if I could.
And uh, the people that you have wrestled over in New Zealand from the people that you have wrestled over in the UK, um, in your opinion, who who has been the best person to test you and take you to your limits here in New Zealand, other than the UK people?
Oh, so for the most part, New Zealand wrestlers are very different to British wrestlers, and um, wrestlers that you wrestle in England are a lot more well-rounded. Um, you, it's very hard to get by on a scene like the British scene by being an incomplete wrestler. Going back to what Andy Simmons told me about, you have to go to the gym, have to go get a tan, all that kind of stuff. It's because I may have been a competent wrestler, but if I wasn't tanned, if I didn't look the part, why would anybody hire me? Because you've got 20, 30, 40, 100, 200 guys there waiting to get that spot that are a complete package. So how can you go in there, claim a spot on a show when there's only so limited spots available if you're not? Um, I, when I used to do premiere shows lots, I um, you'd see people come and set up the ring. There were, you know, 5, 6 plus guys and girls there waiting, setting up the ring, waiting to be on those premiere shows. And I considered myself very lucky that I was on those shows, knowing that they wanted to be on there, and not in a "ha, look at you guys" kind of way, like good on you guys for working your asses off to get on these shows, because it's hard
Right.
and it's not easy. And people over here, not everybody, you know, there's a whole lot of really good hard workers, but taking down the ring over here is beneath a lot of people. Um, something I was really quite heartwarming. We had Liam Fury on some shows at the tail end of 2018, and he would stay and do the ring.
Yeah.
For him, it was just normal. This is what you do. Um, and same with Ruben De Jong. You know, he's a guy who you sort of say, you know, don't worry about taking down the ring. You know, you're not obligated to. Don't worry about it. And he wants to help, and he has, and he's taken the ring down and loaded into the truck and all that kind of stuff too. And those kind of things are amazing because that's how the wrestling business works. And a lot of times, and you see it with trainees, they they expect everything handed to them a lot more over here than they do in New Zealand and sorry, in England. And that's not saying that everybody's that way or that it's the norm. And it's not to to shit on anybody, but it's an easier scene to be in New Zealand. You don't have to necessarily be a complete package to be a wrestler. I mean, if you to turn it back and say, okay, if you look at Graham Hughes as a wrestler, I'm this fat old guy who doesn't move as well as I used to, and some people said I should have retired years ago, but I can still get booked over here. I wouldn't get booked in England now. I know I wouldn't, but I can
Yeah.
get booked here because it's easier. It does help that I book myself, but it's, I can still get booked elsewhere too, and that I think is the big difference. Is the the good in New Zealand gets overshadowed a little bit by the bad, and the good in New Zealand wrestling, um, a lot of the time get turned bitter and twisted because of the bad and the toxic, and I don't think anybody's immune to that. I mean, I have moments where I look at New Zealand wrestling and I just think, what on earth am I doing? Why am I running shows? What's the point? Because for the vast majority of people, they want to give. I say not the vast majority. It's a bit of an odd, a mean way to say it.
Mm.
But if you look at guys like yourself who go above and beyond at every opportunity and do a whole bunch of stuff extra and to help everybody that they can, uh, versus some other people who um, ask the first thing they ask is, "What can I have?" or "What's for me?" or "What am I doing?" Um, and obviously, we're nowhere near the WWE. We never will be. But I don't imagine John Cena or Roman Reigns is saying to some walking into Vince McMahon's office, going, "I'm not going to promote your show until I see what I'm doing, or what am I doing, or yeah, I know WrestleMania's coming up, but what have you got for me?" Or my personal favorite that happens a lot over here is, "Have you got anything good for me?" Like, well, what an odd question. Surely every match is
Yeah.
good for you. Surely,
Mm.
I'm certainly not above wrestling anybody. You're not arrogant enough to say I'm only going to wrestle good people, because how do you determine what's good? And that's what you get a little bit over here by certain people.
Yeah. We have a interesting question here as well. What is the difference that you see between younger wrestlers or trainees today compared to what you saw first starting training in New Zealand?
Um, I think the biggest difference between now and then, I mean, when I first started teaching in New Zealand was 2008, and I taught for 6 or 7 months at the Wild for Wrestling School for KPW, and I only saw the um, the KPW trainees firsthand. Um, but I think there's a lot more willingness to work together now, and the wrestlers and trainees just want to wrestle. It's less sort of turf worry now than it used to be because the lines are so blurred. Um, but I think wrestlers then were a little bit hungrier than they are now, which is odd when you think of you've got people like Travis Banks and you've got people like Dakota Kai who have and Aaron Henry, Henare, which I'm butchering languages, I know, but um, when you have people like those who have legitimately made it to the highest level of this business, wouldn't you find that really motivating? I would
Mm.
find that really motivating if I was a young trainee starting out. And it baffled me how people aren't just willing to work and to wrestle and to train and to sit rings up and take rings down and and bump their asses off because that's what you should be doing, really. And everybody used to be that way. I mean, I can only speak for KPW, but I remember making people go for runs. And me and Rob was injured at the time as Charlie Roberts. We would drive off down the road, and people would have to try and catch us. Um, and you could do that now, and some people would do it, but then some people wouldn't turn up to train the next week because they say, "Oh, well, we didn't learn any wrestling today. What are you going to teach me wrestling? Or when can I learn this? When can I learn that?" And there's I hear horror stories of people learning things that they shouldn't be learning for 6, 7 months, and they're learning them in their first 2 weeks or their first week, and and people just do what they're told all the time. Could you trust in people? And um, I mean, yeah, this. there's a comment that's just come up from Justin and
Yeah, I just saw that.
saying training to be a professional wrestler is a huge responsibility. It should be taken seriously. You're essentially in charge of ensuring the survival of the sport that you love. Um, and that's something I take really seriously. Is when people get people come to me with asking for advice or they want comments on matches, and for the most part, I don't give it because I don't want to know. They want to know the things that they did that I liked, or
Yeah.
they want to know the how good they are. They want me to tell them, "Oh, you're so great, you're ready to go. Send a tape to the WWE," kind of thing. That's what people want to hear. It's very
Mm,
rare that people want to know the actual ins and outs and what I think they can do to improve on. And my word isn't gospel, but my word comes from 19 years of experience. And I think if you look at my track record and my history with teaching and coaching and the people who have come from schools that I've taught at and the people I've trained and the schools that I've taught at and been at, I think it's comes from a genuine place of knowing what I'm doing. And I I have to be honest to people who I actually give feedback to and advice to because I feel I it's a detriment to the business if I do it any other way. And it doesn't help the business and it doesn't help anybody because eventually people who don't really want to learn will fade away and the people who do want to learn will rise to the top. If you just look at the guy wrestling at WrestleMania in the main event for the WWE title, he's a
mhm.
guy who always wanted to better himself. He is somebody who traveled 9 hours plus to train, um, and he's his own biggest asset, and he deserves everything that he gets. And yeah, it's a big responsibility of teaching anybody. You're holding somebody's life in their hands
Yeah.
very frequently.
And like it's seeing all your trainees, whether they are in the WWE currently, or they were in the WWE currently, or whatever major promotion that they're working, or any tours that they're doing, anything like that. It's probably really heartwarming for you to see that everything that you have taught them, that they've taken it very seriously and evolved it to something.
Yeah, I mean, I think um, the difference maker for a lot of things um, is the person who's taking the advice. So I can give the same 3 sentences of advice to 10 different people, and one person will take that piece of advice and run with it and adapt and make it their own piece of advice, and one person, or sorry, and then 9 people won't. And then what happens quite often is the one person will praise the person who gave them the advice, and the 9 people will curse the person who gave them the advice. And and that's just that's part of it all. But the difference maker always is that person,
Right.
and the person taking the advice and running with it and listening when people give them feedback. In New Zealand, lots of the time, people say, "Oh, can you give me feedback?" You give them feedback, and the first thing they reply with, "Oh, I was trying to do this," or "Yeah, no, I was doing that," or "This is why I did this," or "This is why I did that." And it's obvious straight away that you're just wasting your time giving them feedback because they're not interested in feedback. They're just interested in me saying, "Oh yeah, you're great. Go ahead, be your awesome self. Nothing I can teach you. Move on."
And there's before we head back to the UK stuff, there's a couple other things I want to talk about there. Just before we move back to that, just want to quickly touch on the subject of he is your hardest working trainee. When he had an injury, he showed up every day and sat there and watched and learned. And everybody told him that he would never ever be a wrestler, but will always be either a referee, a manager, or a backstage interviewer. And you had the faith in him, and he adapted, he overcame, and he trained and he worked his ass off to get to where he is now. And obviously, we're talking about Charlie Roberts here.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and I want to get your story behind him, um, you know, your when you first met him to where he is now, and he is like the bar of New Zealand wrestling, and no one can deny that. If anybody wants to make a name for themselves, they have to go up against him.
I'd absolutely agree with that. I think if if you want to know, I mean, if you can't have a good match with Charlie Roberts, then you should stop wrestling and go back to training, no matter what. Um, and I'm happy to write that blanket statement. I'm happy to repeat that blanket statement as many times because if you can't have a good match with Charlie Roberts, then very you should take a step back and reevaluate either the school that you belong to or whether you should be in wrestling or whether you're actually trying and putting in the work because the answer to one of those things will be something needs to make a change or you need to change or you need to go to a different school or something because Charlie Roberts very infrequently has bad matches. He doesn't often have bad matches. And when I started teaching for KPW, he was. I always feel bad for insulting him, but he wasn't a wrestler. It wasn't really a trainee. He was, but he wasn't. Um, he was a journalist for I think it was NZPWI, who had wanted to be a wrestler, joined the KPW Wild for Wrestling School, and they had made him be a manager and a referee. I think it was referee first and then manager, maybe the other way around. Really don't remember. Um, and he had hurt his knee and torn, I think it's MCL possibly. He tore one of the muscles in his leg, um, and he needed a surgically repaired. And he got it surgically repaired, and then he tore it again and had to have a second repair, I think. And I came in just when he had his second repair. I'm sure when he had his second repair, or maybe just before. But he was learning and doing things in the way the British people do things, the way the British schools run. He would have been tailor made for, and still would be. He showed up early. He did the airport runs. He was happy to do the driving for somebody. He was happy to. Nothing was ever too much of a chore because he wanted to be a wrestler. He wanted to pay dues. He wanted to do it the right way. He wanted to learn. He wanted to succeed. And I listened to every person on that booking team, and the majority of the wrestlers at that time say that he won't be a wrestler. He's never going to be a wrestler. Um, he's a phenomenal manager, phenomenal ref, but he's never going to be a wrestler. And not quite with the air of don't waste time on him, but don't waste too much time on him because he's never going to be a wrestler. And I looked at it very, very differently because I looked at people's commitment and people's way of doing things, and he was he was the top guy in that Wild for Wrestling school. Um, I just don't think he knew it yet, and nobody else there knew it. Um, but he was always a top guy because you know me and him went and picked up crash mats for the gym. Me and him, he drove me around because I didn't have a car at the time. He would pick me up from Petone, drive me to Miramar, and then drive me back home again. Um, we would go out and do these little tasks and all these sort of little things for wrestling. And he was asking questions and he wanted to learn. And he always wanted to learn. He always wanted to ask questions. And he just wanted to be good. He wasn't worried about what spot he was going to have. He wasn't worried about the late nights. He wasn't worried about early morning stuff. He just wanted to do good. And I think his mentality is what set him apart from everybody else. Because you had people there, there's not very many of them. There's still a few guys who wrestle there, and the people who still wrestle, for the most part, are the people who are never going to make it. Ace Flame was always the star. He was always going to be the top guy, and nobody could ever take Ace Flame off of the top of the sort of the pedestal. And there were a lot of guys there who were hungry to not only be at that same level, but to ascend and to be better. And Charlie Roberts was at the top of that list for the people who really wanted it to be. He wanted to make a go of it, and he worked harder than anybody else, possibly anybody that I've seen in the business. work before, and it's just a shame that he's in New Zealand and he didn't leave New Zealand 10 years ago. Because if he had,
Hmm.
he would be signed to a major company. He would be one of the mid card to top guys because that's the sort of person that he is. And he's probably he won't admit most of it, but he's still continually one of the hardest workers. Um, and the dedication and time that he still puts into the business, even after all this time. You think 2008 was 12 years ago,
Hmm.
and he'd been wrestling, I think, maybe a year or 2 years by then. So he hasn't been around a short amount of time, and he's still as passionate and still as kind and still as caring as he has ever been. And he wants to do good, and he wants to help other people do good. Um, and you can't fault his work in the ring, and the way that he is with a lot of people as well, and helping and guiding them along the way is, second to none.
And just going back to the UK stuff, and uh, you were part of Series 2 for FWA, and then Series 3 guys came in, and you continued on until uh, and there's one of your trainees from now who most of them do have their own wrestling schools or have just recently opened up a wrestling school. And Rishi Ghosh opened up his wrestling school. He was meant to come for a holiday over here, but then he ended up opening up his own school. What are your thoughts about um, him opening up his own school and taking on the responsibility of being a trainer as well?
So, I mean, I don't think there could be anybody better suited to running a school for wrestling than Rishi. Um, Wrestling always attracts a certain kind of people, myself included, um, who are quite often shy, quite often insecure, um, quite often have very low self-esteem. And I speak from experience because I'm all these things, especially was all these things. And Rishi is one of the just genuinely nice people around, and one of the nicest people around. And it's not fake, it's not an act. He isn't trying to swindle anybody out of money. He's not putting on a nice guy act that nobody's ever going to believe. He's he's just a nice guy. And the fact that he's a phenomenal wrestler and a phenomenal talent and a phenomenal actor as well just help him and help him massively. And I think if if you're not sure if wrestling is what you want to do because you're scared, if you go to see Rishi, he'll he'll coach you and guide you in a way that you'll know that it is something that you want to do. And I think that's invaluable. And his students are very lucky to have him as their coach because he's an insanely knowledgeable wrestler. He's been around a long time. He's wrestled some of the most amazing wrestlers in the world. Um, and yeah, I mean, you've wrestled him.
Yeah,
He's phenomenal. Um, One of my most favorite matches I've ever had been against Rishi.
yeah. I got the opportunity to wrestle him for Premier Promotions for Mr. John Fremantle, which is again, thank you very much to you for giving me the opportunity and to meet all these amazing people. You mentioned Andy Simmons giving you, you know, some advice and some good advice, and when you were like didn't know what to do and stuff, and seeing him run his own wrestling school as well, which is the Portsmouth School of Wrestling, and seeing the things that he's given to the business from when you guys first met to where he is now. What are your thoughts of him also taking on the responsibility and all these people just taking on responsibilities of like I want to be a trainer as well and train the next generation?
So if there's if I ever wanted to go to a school, and if I was going to go to a school and get myself back into shape, I would go to see Andy. Um, he'd be the person I would trust the most with kicking me into shape, um, a shape that isn't round. Before anybody else mentions the fat thing, um, because he is just simply, he knows everything that he's doing. He knows his strengths. He knows his weaknesses. He it's hard to say how good he is because I don't even think he really knows himself how good he is, or either he does and he just downplays it a lot. But he he's somebody that people should go and learn from. Um, he knows what it takes to make it in this business. He he can guide people in the right direction, and if you listen to Andy and do what he says in training, then you have a good chance of having a really good career in wrestling.
And when you were doing your full schedule in the UK and stuff before you moved over to New Zealand, who who was the person that you learned the most from, and who was your best opponent that you got to work with?
So I learned a whole lot from a whole lot of other people when I did my sort of year and a bit with Premiere for John Fremantle. Um, one of the most amazing experiences I've had in wrestling for my life was being sort of a regular tag partner of Flash Barker. Um, we wrestled a whole bunch of tag matches together, and I learned so much about timing, footwork, ring positioning, um, the kind of aspect of what you can get away with while being a babyface or a good guy. Pardon me. I learned a lot from him. Um, there was nobody better in my book to put me with as a partner because you get to learn so much, and you get to learn so much very often. And I wouldn't have come here the same way with the same outlook on wrestling because he changed my outlook on wrestling. He really did. He taught me what to do when somebody gets really hurt in the ring, which I think is an invaluable piece of information and something that I'd not previously been told. Um, because I accidentally knocked out Jimmy Havoc, and he was my tag partner, and he sort of guided the rest of the entire match. Um, in terms of learning from opponents and sort of favorite in that aspect, um, one of my favorite matches was in England was against Rishi Ghosh for SWF, which was November or December. I think it was maybe in December of 2012. And every idea I had about the match was a bad idea. Um, well, most of them I think were a bad idea. And Rishi very calmly, very professionally changed my thought pattern on the match, um, which is a very humbling experience as well because he was one of my trainees from when we taught the junior sessions for the FWA Academy, and it's it was amazing to see the level of understanding and the level of knowledge that he had, which I imagine had only grown by now. And that's one of my favorite matches because it went really well. The only muck up in there was when I forgot one thing and did a kick instead of a body slam, I think it was. But it's one of my most treasured memories as well because I had some friends in the crowd as well, and it was the first time that I had friends. I mean, my wife and kids have seen me wrestle a few times, but it was the first time I had friends in the crowd since I was 16, maybe. Because it was local, it was in Gosport, and I lived in Portsmouth, so I wasn't too far away. And it was just a really nice experience. Um, I've been very lucky to have wrestled some amazing people, people I've never met before and people I had met before. And lots of that is just due to John Fremantle giving me a chance, and again me being humble and wanting to learn and asking for advice. I asked everybody I could for advice and wanted the advice and listened And if somebody said, don't do this move, it looks bad, you take the smart option and don't do that move again. Because if you've got somebody like a Flash Barker or um, somebody of that caliber saying, don't do this, there's a reason they're saying, don't do this. So you don't do it. It's kind of common sense, really.
And every goal that you set out throughout your career and stuff, do you think you've achieved all of them?
So I always say yes because I had very realistic goals. I mean, when I was 13, 14, or 14, I wanted to be the first British WWE champion. That was my dream. When I started wrestling, I wanted to wrestle full time, which I've done. Um, I wanted to learn, and I wanted to teach, and I wanted somebody to say they were my favorite wrestler. One of the most bizarre experiences, and um, the shy, insecure 15, 16-year old in you is still shy and insecure about it, but it's also a lovely moment and it's great and it builds your ego a little bit, which is never a good thing, but it's when you're young it happens. As I remember, I was walking with some friends and my girlfriend at the time. We were walking down Southsea, and a whole bunch of kids ran up and said, oh my god, are you that wrestler? Are you that Graham guy? And I said yes, and um, that was an amazing experience because you felt famous and you know, your ego gets a little bit to your head, but it's a nice thing. So my goals for things now are all around other people. I want to see other people I want to see other people succeed and go places and do things. So people like yourself, people like Charlie Roberts, people like Spencer Kyle, the list goes on. You guys are all where my dreams in wrestling live now. You know, I have a couple of little goals. Like I'd like to hit a crowd of 200 for a show in Auckland for one of our shows. That's another goal that I have. Um, but yeah, for the most part, I achieved everything I wanted to achieve. Maybe have a six pack again one day, but probably not.
Um, is there any advice and anything that you would like to say to the viewers or anybody else who's going to watch the behind the wrestler episode later on Pivot Share and stuff?
Um, Mainly that what seems like the easy path in wrestling is not always the best path to take. Everybody will offer you every single thing under the sun to get you to join their training school or to get onto their shows or to be their friend, etc., etc. Um, but it's not always going to be the best for people. I think if you look at if you take New Zealand wrestling kind of out of the equation, if you look at say 10 wrestling schools and you've got nine of them saying we're the best, look at us, hey, look at us, we're the best, and one that isn't, look closely at the one that isn't, because more often than not, the one place that isn't saying we're the best is the place that is the best. Because they don't need to tell anybody that they're the best. Other people tell them that they're the best.
I just like Justin's comment. Just reading Justin's comment.
So, because the comments won't show up in the video when I edit that together. So it says, for the current students of the Hughes Academy and workers in general, really, the passion that you have currently for the business right now isn't guaranteed to last forever. Be fluid in your time spent in wrestling. Embrace change. Evolve. It's easy to get stuck in a rut, and that's when disinterest creeps in.
What is next for Graham Hughes?
So, what is next is pretty much the same as it has been for the last few years. I will get some editing done. I will um, get some things sorted and then go to bed. Just in general, um, it's a shame I don't wrestle as much as I would like to all the time. but I have a young family, and they come above everything else. Um, and because New Zealand is New Zealand wrestling, it's not a place to make money, so it's not a job. People are going to get offended by that, I'm sure, but it's not a job. So anybody who says that they're a professional wrestler, um, maybe go relearn the definition of a professional because it means you get paid. Um, but yeah, I mean, we're obviously in this COVID-19 lockdown in New Zealand, which is why we're doing this one over the wonders of Facebook. Um, which is the only reason that I have come on to do one
He
because
finally said yes, though.
yeah, because it's not something I relish the idea of doing. Is talking about myself for what are we now, an hour and a half,
Yep.
an hour and 40 minutes. Yeah, an hour and a half of me talking about myself is not the normally how I like to spend my time. But yeah, I'll just continue to work and make sure that people get the right advice and I hope that I never waver in telling people what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. And I think that's the biggest part for me is I'm probably never going to be the most popular person around because people aren't going to like advice. People aren't going to like the things that I say. Um, I've had some good experiences in wrestling in New Zealand, and I've had some bad experiences wrestling in New Zealand. But I'm not gonna shy away from the fact that I've had bad experiences, and I'm happy to share those bad experiences. I'm happy to share the good experiences too. And I think that's the main thing. And nobody's perfect. Some of our shows are great. Some of our shows are awful. Some of our crowd sizes are good. Some of our crowd sizes are awful. But anybody who says, "Oh no, our crowds are brilliant," hundreds of people every show, or our matches are phenomenal, or all these matches are amazing, kind of get their head up their ass a little bit, and it's never true. But yeah, I think next for me is just I will continue the same way as I have been, and hopefully just continue to teach good people and wrestle
And
good people.
just before we finish up, thank you for the time, and thank you for telling us your story and answering some questions and stuff. Just before we finish up, I know everybody back in the UK misses you a lot, and I know they would want you back for a wrestling gig at some point in time. Um, Maybe one day you might end up going back. But on behalf of everybody from there, I just want to say thank you. I know they miss you. I know they are very proud of you and what you've been doing with the academy and everybody else and helping everybody out. And I know that Mark is going to be super proud of you of what you have achieved so far and what you are going to achieve. And thank you for all the hard work you put in, not just for um, for your family, but for all of us and for all the students. And thank you for going above and beyond every single time and for caring and for being in our lives. And yeah, just thank you so much for all of the opportunities, not just for me, but for everybody else as well.
And just to add to that point is, you said a few times, thank you for the opportunities, but I don't think people necessarily realize what opportunities always are. Um, the opportunities is an introduction. Um, if you say, okay, let's take Premier Promotions, a place that I love to wrestle, and a place that I called home in England for a while, and a place that I would still probably call home if I went back to England to wrestle, and I would still like to wrestle there, obviously. Um, the the help that I gave you in that sort of instance, for example, is I made the introduction, and that's it. The actual work of getting bookings and the actual work of getting repeat bookings and all of that kind of stuff, that works on you. It's not it's not a given thing. I can recommend 10 people and the promoter gets a bad vibe of 10 of them or 9 of them or 5 of them, or whatever. It's the opportunities for the most part is an introduction. That's all that was ever promised to me for things. When Andy Simmons said he put his career on kind of not on the line, but he sort of said, "Oh, to John, Graham's a hard worker. He'll do good work. He comes from a good place. Give him a chance." And then the rest of the work is on me to try and get myself the bookings and to do the work. And the first booking's the easy one to get, but it's the repeat bookings are the hard one. And even just looking at yourself, you've gone and gotten repeat bookings.
Uh, okay, I think it cut out there a bit. Um,
I'm back. I don't know if everything I think died.
okay,
Yeah. So the repeat booking is the hard one. So you making you you can say thank you, and obviously you do lots, but it's not undeserved, and it's not like I've just waved a magic wand and you've got work. It's that business doesn't work that way. Um, if you're in New Zealand and you want opportunities, if Charlie Roberts is the one recommending you to me, or Kartik is the one recommending you to me, um, they're people that I take their word very seriously. Um, and just one nice little tidbit of advice for wrestlers in New Zealand looking to wrestle more and to be on more shows and to be seen more is don't ignore people. The amount of people who send a message and say, "Hey, I would like to wrestle on your show," um, and then you reply to them, and then they don't reply for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months plus, whatever, and then say, "Oh, I'm ready to do a booking." I'm not. So, see you later, kind of deal.
mm,
But yeah, I mean, I could spout nonsensical advice for days for New Zealand wrestlers. Um, but most people in England will just wonder why on earth you give that information because it's common sense. And New Zealand wrestlers, for the most part, the people who already get it will get it, and the people who don't probably never will.
mm. Um,
There's a question from Mr. Sayers that is,
yeah, I just saw that. Okay, do you want to quickly answer this one?
yeah, sure. So do you want to ask the questions, then because
Yeah.
otherwise I can see it.
Uh, so the question is, have you ever done anything with James Mason?
So the only thing I've ever done with James Mason is, um, I believe he kicked me once in a rumble years and years and years ago, and since then I have just watched him with awe from afar. And every time I watched All Star shows that he's been on there, and there's been a few, he's one of the, if not one of the best pro wrestlers. He's one of, if not the best professional wrestler probably in the world. He is almost flawless in the ring. And if you ever get a chance to watch or to learn from him, then do everything that you can to. And and same with people like Dean Allmark. These people are phenomenal. And Roy Knight as well is another one that everybody should be rushing to try and learn from.
Okay, cool. Okay. Um, okay. Again, thank you very much for giving us your story. Um, I'm gonna let you go to sleep because I know you got a whole bunch of other things to do.
No
Um,
worries.
thank you for taking the time out, and thank you for all your lovely stories. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and I'll catch everybody at the next episode of Behind the Wrestler.
Absolutely.